For the introduction, Father Tim. I just like to describe myself as someone who loves the Lord and who loves to ride motorcycles. So if you want to remember me by anything, just those two nomenclature is fine. It's a pleasure to be here. I had a lovely drive, easy drive, away from the flow of traffic from Newnan to Columbus. So that's always a plus. So today I want to share some reflections with you on the topic of discernment. Discernment really can be concerned and described as not about finding something new to do. It is about discovering who God is inviting us to become. So you may ask, why discernment? Why now? Well, our lectionary for the last 2 weeks really pointed us to some wonderful themes around discernment. First, you heard, of course, of the temptation of Jesus, how the Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness, and he was tempted by Satan. And through a process of discernment and focusing on the Word of God in Deuteronomy, Jesus followed God's call and his divine purpose. And then, of course, yesterday we heard in the gospel of the wonderful story of one of my favorite characters in the New Testament, Nicodemus. He's wrestling with the concept of his spirituality and his intellectual authority, and he goes to Jesus in the middle of the night to find out if indeed what he understood to be the sole understanding of God was being turned upside down by the many acts of Jesus, another act of discernment. And then finally, what has been wrestling at my parish in Newnan, St. Paul's, is to discern how to find God in the midst of what they are seeing in the world, wars and rumors of wars, and many topics that are raising up on social media and our television, not to assume a particular position, but how to respond to where God is calling them, and how to offer words of healing and comfort to those who are seeking the love of Christ in their life. So for us at St. Paul's, and I'm sure for you and for the lectionary, the topic of discernment should be reigning at the forefront of your conversations as well as your prayers. So what indeed is discernment? I know that you are about to ask me that. Discernment is the spiritual practice of listening for God's voice. It isn't trying to figure out what to do exactly, but who is directing you to do what you're called to do. It's also prayerfully distinguishing between competing desires. I like to think about that as discerning what is God's will for our lives as opposed to our limited, myopic view of what we think God's will is for our lives. And then to align with that, align with God's will. And then finally, discernment is to recognize that the decisions that we make once we are united and aligned with God's will, that we are not making those decisions alone. So our discernment is a calling of God into our decision-making process, a calling of God to determine what words and phrases and how we are going to respond to what we are seeing within the world. A few things I would like to highlight about discernment that I have found in my life to be so important. That when we discern and discern effectively, carefully, and slowly, it's never an impulse. It's deliberate words, deliberate actions that take time. And then also is never anxiety driven. One of the things that we are called to do as leaders in the church clergy is to assume a non-anxious presence. Whatever crisis that we are seeing in our ministries, and that is whether a boiler has an issue or the AC is never on, or there's something happening in ministry, as leaders within our church, we are called to be non-anxious, not driven by anxiety. That's the same thing about discernment as well. When we discern effectively, we are centered and focused on where God is calling us. Discernment also, to get to that point, requires us to engage in some actions. one of prayer, scripture reflection, and then also in community as well. And the communal aspect is part of who we are as Episcopalians. One key aspect of what I love in terms of our liturgy every single Sunday is that when we move through our liturgy, the very structured form of our liturgy, of the opening acclamation, of the reading of scriptures, of the confession, of the celebration of the Eucharist, all of that is leading us in scripture and in action and in song to discern where we are to go at the end of the service as we listen to the post-communion prayer. So that's a bit about an overview of discernment. Let me tell you about my personal discernment. As Father Tim highlighted, that I was once a lawyer, or as my father and mother would say, I was once doing the devil's work, and now I'm doing God's work. So my discernment led me from the practice of law to ordained ministry went like this. There are two specific instances where God called me to make a pivotal change in my life. I was a corporate commercial litigator in the British Virgin Islands. So because it's an offshore jurisdiction, there are many cases from all over the world whose company was domiciled in the British Virgin Islands. So I found myself in a commercial court in the middle of a trial, and there are two individuals who are the parties in this matter. And they are crying and arguing and trying to win this case where the subject matter is about 100 hotels based in China. And as a litigator, I'm supposed to be as adversarial as you can be. Meaning you need to win this case, file as many interlocutory applications, have wonderful closing arguments to win this case on behalf of your client. But I found myself about to cross-examine one of the witnesses and sitting and wondering what it will be like for these two parties who were once college friends who had an idea to open one hotel that led to 100 hotels that are now arguing because their wives don't like each other and they don't like each other. A personal issue. Well, what was that stake was hundreds of millions of dollars. So I knew full well there and then that there was something wrong with my ethos because God was calling me to bring people together and not to try to divide them or win in a case where there's always a winner and a loser. That's one aspect when I knew the law in the future was not for me. A second was my son was born in 2009. And then about a year later, he'll be in church, and he was quite active. Just FYI, he's 16 now, and he plays soccer. So he burns that energy out, thanks be to God. But he was really active in church as a toddler. So I have to take him up, and I have to take him outside of the church in Tortola, British Virgin Islands. And just imagine just being in the sanctuary or the nave of the church, but there's speakers on the outside of Trinity. So if you're walking on the street, even though you're not in the building, you can hear everything that is happening inside the church. That was the same of my sending parish in Tortola. So I'm holding my son, and I'm outside listening to the service, and the rector says, if any one of you is thinking and praying about serving on the altar, God is speaking to you right now. So I'm holding my son, who is wriggling in my arms. The voice coming over the speaker sounds like the voice of God, even though I know it's the rector, but it seems to me I'm the only one outside that he's speaking to me. And then beyond the building, there's a graveyard. And I'm thinking that someday, at some point, God will call me home. So my mortality was facing me right to my face, and whatever legacy I was going to leave, I was holding in my arms. And there God was speaking to me. So that was part of my discernment of God speaking in a particular way. And I always tell these stories, and I get various reactions about why is it did you leave law? How did you know God was speaking to you? And I sit and I bask in those stories and those responses over and over again. But as I go older, and I'm sure you are far more wiser than I am, we know that discernment as an act as a communication between yourself and God doesn't happen once or twice or 3 times. It happens numerous times in your life when you are faced with a crisis where God may seem distant from you, or you are filled with joy and God is leading you to do something anew. So discernment, as I want to leave with you, is something that you engage in over and over and over within your life. So my call narrative is my call narrative. But I discern to go to St. Michael and all angels. I discern to leave St. Michael and all angels and to go to St. Paul's. And while at St. Paul's, I am currently discerning what does the future and the vision of that beautiful parish will look like. So you might be asking, I can see it on your faces, sounds great, Father Winston, but you're talking about discernment as a definition, you're talking about discernment in your call narrative, but how can I discern effectively in my own life? Again, wonderful question, by the way. I am drawn to Saint Benedict. Have you ever heard of him? Yeah, he was a wonderful monastic individual who lived a life of prayer, of fasting, of isolation, but also searching for where God was in the midst of that silence. And based on his work that has been recorded by theologians and practiced by many individuals, there is a rule of life or an order in which you can engage in that will lead you to effective discernment so you can hear the voice of God more clearly. The first is to listen. I like this phrase, to listen with the ear of your heart. Now it sounds fancy, I don't know what that means, but it sounds fancy. What it means, I would try to interpret is that we can hear the cacophony of different sounds in our daily life, our spouses, our kids, what is on television, the rustling of the wind, but to listen deeply for the voice of God is to communicate what's on your heart and know that God is responding to you in a unique way that only you can hear. And then second, on the listening, is discernment begins with an interior quiet. I remember being in seminary over 10 years ago and just being so flooded with all the information, all of the systematic theology sounds wonderful, but they never tell you is never applicable to parish ministry. So all of these sounds, and just needed a moment just to be quiet. So engaging in meditative practices of just sitting and listening without any agenda filled me with the voice of God most deeply. And I commend that to you. The second heading is stability. Faithfulness to place and people. So when we are discerning and we talk about discerning in community, I'm referring to the relationships that you're building over time. That you experience birthdays, anniversaries, deaths in family, crises of faith, in a community that will also nurture you as well. That's the benefit of our Episcopal Church. The way in which we fellowship, how we experience liturgy, how we gather, allows us to discern in community. But also, another heading is obedience. To deeply listen before acting. One of the principal ways in which you can always tell a more effective clergy person is one who is slow to speak and slow to anger. Or we get angry. Or we get speechless sometimes. Because we are human beings. But to be able to respond in love, to discern what we are hearing, to discern hurts or to discern where someone is struggling in their faith, it calls us to step back, to be that non-anxious presence and discern where God is calling us to discern and to respond. And I commend that to you in your personal lives. So when you hear something that's uncomfortable or something that you prefer, a quick response to step back and to discern what God really is calling you to say, to be, or to do in that moment. And then there's this balance as a fourth heading. The Latin is ora el labora, and that is prayer and work integrated. I believe we experience that in worship as well. That when we engage in work on a Sunday morning, that we don't dust our hands and our feet and say, well, we are going to engage in God's work again next week, Sunday. I'm sure you have a robust outreach program or even a robust pastoral program where you reach out and you call or visit and care for each other. So how do you pray on Sunday and work during the rest of the week? Now, having said, outlined what discernment is, why discernment is critical for us, and a rule of life that you can live by, I want you to engage in conversations at the table to wrestle with some questions around your own discernment. So the first question is, where in your life right now do you sense restlessness, curiosity, or holy discomfort? Could that be an invitation from God? So I want you to turn to your neighbor, your friend, family member, and answer that question. There are 3 questions in total, and each question is 3 minutes each. At the end of each question, I would invite someone to just popcorn style, just reflect on what you heard at the table. So that's the first question. You have 3 minutes. You can go for it. Yeah. Whenever you're ready. Yeah, what's up? I love the sound of the conversations. I guess the question was invited. Would anyone like to share any reflections, something you may have heard that tickled your fancy, that encouraged you as you discover and discern your call? Anyone?
In our table, there's some general restlessness.
Yeah.
And we think, we discomfort, we're not sure of that, but, with the war that we have begun in Iran. And it was pretty unanimous here. And could that be an invitation from God? And we all agree that we can't personally do anything to end the war, but what we can do is communicate with our congressional representatives.
That's right. Sure. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for taking the pleasure of going first. I appreciate that. Thank you. Anyone else? Sure.
At our table, Debbie was kind enough to look up discernment and discern for us. We Googled it.
Yes.
Because we were all not real sure what that meant. And that was very helpful, especially as a verb, to distinguish between wrong and right.
Yes.
And hopefully we grew up learning that there's difference in how to discern that. We had to understand the meaning of the word.
Yes.
In order to progress.
Good, excellent, good. That's discernment, to say there's some uncertainty, you want to know more. Yes, thank you. I saw a hand over here. Yeah.
Lenten discipline. Have we kept our Lenten discipline? Have we all of our Lenten, we named our Lenten discipline yet? We talk about a career is what I'm doing, what God would want me to do. Am I saying what God would want me to say? And then we talked about time goes so fast, it's so much you want to do, and it ticks so fast.
Yes, yes. Good, 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 excellent. We have time for one more before we go to the final question.
At our table, we were way closer to home than what we were talking about, and an actual thing that happened with our sweet Ashley here is she, because of her involvement in the vestry and some things that were going on, was personally called to get the homeless breakfast started again because of a holy discomfort about us not doing what we used to do to provide the service. And so it's getting started back up because of an actual discernment that happened to somebody.
Amen.
It has been going, that's how, just a very small movement.
Yes, we're gonna wait.
Yes, yes.
Exactly.
That's the prayer and the work. Wonderful example. Excellent. So the final question. What is one small faithful step you can take in the next month to explore or respond to God's call more intentionally? So 5 minutes.
I need to
Welcome you back. All right, as we wrap up, I would love to hear from you. Any reflections on that question that you would like to share? Sure.
Just being able to, I know for me personally, like being able to just sit there in silence, because like my mind's like constantly having thoughts. So just being able to sit in silence is it's something that I can take, because like that's always been like a real struggle for me.
Yes, yes. So you're going to commit to some silence and meditation. Wonderful. more listening, and more standing in silence and just observing what is around and who is around. Absolutely. I think that falls close to love your neighbor as yourself, recognizing your neighbor's needs and wants, and how can you pray and support that. Excellent. So we've had two from this side. Any from this side? Oh, sure. Hey.
We were talking about being intentional, maybe inviting more people to Lenten Luncheons.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
For outreach.
Yes.
Get people here, let them see the community that we have.
Yes. So your discernment is around how do you nurture your community and invite those who may not be aware into what the love and the representation of God that you have here. Love it. Love it. One more for the road as we close. Oh, here's one. Okay.
We were along these lines, basically trying to make intentional time in our life to be able to hear God. And I think that was along the lines across the room too. And finding quiet time, carving out the time for that is more and more difficult due to these telephones that are close to us. And so being intentional listening for God has to when you're at peace and have a few minutes to hear Him. And so we were trying to figure out when in our lives to carve out that time.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for your honesty. And our culture is the more busy you are, the more important you are. So your worth and your identity and is all kind of, I'm so busy, my schedule is packed, so let me try to fit you in. But taking time just to be as intentional, taking time, and what I've learned is putting it in my calendar, scheduling it, really works well to block my calendar to say it is time for silence or prayer or reflection. Thank you for your honesty.
On a lighter note.
Sure.
I always keep saying, Lord, just one time, would you say it out loud? Understand, of course, I was saying that was.
Yes. Can I just say, I don't think you're the only one who has that prayer. I think there's a chorus of us who also say that. So thank you so much for that levity. So as I close, I just want to affirm and lift you up with something you already know. That when we consider discernment, because of your baptism, that you are all called. You're all called to hear God in a unique way. You're all called to serve God in a unique way. There's no need for a caller alone. Your baptism is your spiritual authority to follow and to do God's work. And then also, the needs of the world and the longing of your heart are often meet in the intersection of your calling. So if you have a particular desire and a love, you have a particular skill, listen to where God is inviting you to hone that skill, develop it, and share it with the world, because your own innate attributes, so what God has gifted to you, and listening to God is going to be the fruit, your blessing to the world or the community in which you serve. So with that, thank you so much for tolerating my accent, my time, and table conversation. I am so blessed to be here with you. So thank you so much.